Top of the morning to you. This is a an upside down Zenith r600, kind of commonly known as the Trans-Oceanic or Zenith Transoceanic. This one happens to be out of its case. I got this at a auction last night. It's in really good shape. The case is pretty immaculate on the thing. It's got a few tiny little bugaboos, nothing major. I had to take it out of the case. It's dead as a doornail, or was dead as a doornail. I worked on, over the years, I've worked on a number of Trans-Oceanics, but I don't think I've ever worked on a 600, at least on an R600. It's a pretty nice radio. It's got, standard controls, the band selectors here, off on volume, and the tuning. What I've done so far, let me scooch over just a tiny bit here. Well, I tell you what, we'll shut you off, or I'll shut the radio off. Flip over. This particular radio, and I believe some of the other Trans-Oceanics, are a little unusual. They have kind of an unusual grounding system inside, and they've got a lot of switches and stuff. There's a lot to potentially go wrong with this. This one also has a jack on the front, and on the body of the radio, on the actual case, there's a little switch that turns this that behind this little kind of a dome here is a little flashlight light, and that runs on a little cell. This radio actually could run on two different batteries. One was kind of the filament in B+, and then this poor tired looking thing was the battery for the light. You can see here there's a little clamp inside there that grips that thing. Over the years, that clamp has just gripped this poor thing to death. I'm going to hang on to it anyway, just as a reference. It's in okay shape. It could be worse. One thing that might be valuable is that little socket on the top. What I was thinking about doing was seeing if I could find if somebody had skinned one of these right there, split it open and photocopied it. There are people on the internet that copy batteries so you can reproduce them. So some of the parts might be okay. It's not leaking badly, it's just crushed. It's kind of sad. And so I took it out of the radio just to get it out of there. This thing had a few little bugaboos. One of them being, which kind of caught me off guard, I haven't run into this in a long time. Some of the tubes were in the wrong sockets. The filament would light, but absolutely nothing happened. So I tinkered with it a tiny bit last night. So this morning I just went through and I thought, well, I'll check the tubes just for fun. Usually the tubes aren't really a problem in these. There is a converter tube that can get a little grumpy, and they're getting kind of hard to find. But it's not a big deal. I checked those and didn't think anything about it. And when I went to check the last tube, I believe it was a 6 V4, that's an audio output tube. It's normally located over here. I noticed that there was another tube there, a 1U5, which is, what is that? One of the IF amps, or probably the RF amp. Yeah, I believe it's an RF amp or detector. It's actually a detector, I'm sorry, I'm not awake this morning. That's okay. One of the other things I had trouble with is finding a schematic for this. Years ago, wasn't a big deal, and lately on the internet it seems like there seems to be some blockade of the schematic or schematics. I couldn't hardly find any of the Zenith schematics. The one place I used to go to seems to have tore that part of their website down for some reason, and probably because people were downloading the schematic and repackaging it and selling it on Fleabay. Yeah, it's raining outside. How lovely. I'm a little disappointed in the fact that people do that, and that just hurts people. No, it doesn't hurt me so much. I can figure out how to get the schematic. It's just not fair to other people. You know, somebody new that wants to get into restoring old radios would probably very much like to have a schematic, and it turns out to be a real pain in the butt for them. It's kind of an annoyance. I don't think it's very fair. I had a rough time getting this out of the chassis. There are only really 2 screws that hold it in. Then there's a bracket up on the top under here, which I'll flip over and show you in a minute. I took that out, but it still wouldn't come loose. I had to take a pocket knife and carefully went along the edge in the back here and slowly wiggled the thing loose. I wasn't sure if this was holding it in. This is actually on a lead, so no. And what ended up being is there's a little kind of a rubbery cardboard around the bezel here, and that ended up being the problem. I also had to take the rod antenna out. If you're going to take one of these apart, be real gentle with it. Kind of look before you leap. I spent probably about, I don't know, probably literally an hour just kind of carefully prying. This side came up first, and then I could peek under that edge there with my flashlight. I really couldn't see anything. I didn't see a reason for it to not to be held in there, but you never know. If you're unfamiliar with something, it's a good way to break something, and then you're really kind of boned. One of the things I'm going to have to fix on this radio is this radio has a cord winder, which you can't see. How about now? There's a cord winder, and it's in not too great a shape. I took it apart. It's kind of on a bracket on the back there, and then it slowly comes apart. There's a lot of little fiddly pieces, and there's a couple pretty small screws, one being smaller than the other. I'll show you that later. The case is in, you have to excuse my stack of crap. I got a lot of old radios last night. The case is in pretty good shape on this. Nothing's broke. It's not tore anywhere. The face is in really great shape. The bottom's a little dirty. Nah, nothing to cry about. A lot of guys go out of their way to recap these and replace every nook and cranny of them. They end up practically rebuilding the radio. Sometimes that's justified, and sometimes it's not. I've got a number of these squirreled away, and most of mine are still stock other than a few capacitors. One of the sources of annoyance and controversy are these Selenium Rectifiers. It's right here. Basically that's kind of an early solid-state rectifier diode. It's easy enough to replace. You'll have to do a little fiddling around to balance it out. You'll need a... what's that? The gods are bowling? Okay. What a rainy day. A lot of guys replace those with solid-state, more modern solid-state diodes, and then you put a load resistor or a current limiting resistor in series with those. Be kind of careful when you do that. You can damage the tubes real easy. One of the other things I'll warn you about from the voice of experience, or I learned it the hard way, is don't get to plugging and unplugging the tubes in these radios with the power on. You can get some nasty side effects, and one of them being you'll burn the filament out of the thing. Then you're looking for a radio tube. Since this is a battery powered set, the filaments on this thing are pretty low. Actually, most of them are a volt. One tube is 3 volts. And these tubes don't have cathodes on them. They're directly coupled with filaments. It makes the radio's design a little different and interesting. There are some other annoying little time bombs in these radios. Some of them have kind of ballast tubes or ballast resistors. If you're unfamiliar with those, they can be a little bit annoying. This tube, make sure it's up, yeah. This tube has a little switch right here, and also there's a little switch right here, which if you want to run the battery set on batteries, you have to plug the line cord into that switch, and it rocks it back and forth. Sometimes those switches can get crudted up. Actually, any of the switches on these old radios can get crudted up and be susceptible to a little grumpiness. Don't get discouraged. Just take your time and be gentle. There are a number of good forums or websites that have other people that restore old radios. My suggestion is you sign up to one of those. You don't have to live on the thing. But if you need a little friendly advice or help or experience from other people, those folks have valuable knowledge which you want to treat really well. It's valuable. So if you ask a question, don't leave them hanging. It's kind of a disservice, you know. Hi, my name's, you know, whatever. I'm working on a. And if you're going to put some information on there, try and be a little specific. I'm working on a Trans-Oceanic. I believe it's a model, you know, r600. A lot of them have the chassis number stamped on the back, and even the word chassis right there. I'm working on this chassis, and I'm having a little trouble, you know, blah, 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 blah. Did anybody else ever see anything like this? When you get a response, and you run away from your computer back to your radio to fix it up, don't forget to be courteous and come back and say, hey, well, that really didn't work for me, but it was an interesting note, or B, yeah, that helped me out, and I got it going again, and, you know, maybe some pictures, or try and put back some information. Think of that as a, you know, kind of a big bowl of water, or, you know, a big trough of water. You know, it's okay that you take a drink out of there, and you know, but don't be afraid to go back to the pump and fill it back up for the next person. Hence, you got to come back with some information, you know, something. Yeah, I had, you know, a good example would be, yeah, I had trouble getting this out of the chassis, out of the case. I mean, and I, you know, kind of carefully went, you know, just tell them what you did. It's a good policy. It's good information. I don't frequent a couple of the forums so much anymore. I don't know why. I guess I just kind of lost interest in them. For me, some of that stuff tends to be kind of tedious. It goes around and around and around. It's kind of like magazines. After a year, you've seen all the different articles and stuff. It doesn't mean it's not valuable. Plenty of people find quite a lot of fun on those forums. Yeah, different strokes for different folks. So there's a few things to look at. Like I said, I went ahead and tested the tubes on these. One of them was a little tired, but not enough to make the radio quit working. These radios have paper caps, these white ones, and a couple of these little brown ones. And there's a black one there, the bumblebee caps they call those. They can be a little problematic. These radios are somewhat notorious for having a lot of drifty resistors, which means, in a nutshell, the value marked on there isn't the value that they've, you know, kind of drifted to over the years. I don't know. To be really honest, I've replaced very few of those over the years. I tend to like to run my radios as stock as possible. One of the things that's kind of fun to do is some of these capacitors, since they have kind of a little sleeve on them, if you're careful, you can shove them out by heating them. And today's newer plastic capacitors are pretty small. Most of them will fit inside there. You can refill them with wax or some glue. Just take your time. There's no hurry. One of the other things I'll warn you about when it comes time to take these out, over in this area on the back of the radio, there is a rod antenna, a whip antenna. You probably want to take that out. Resist the urge to try and loosen the radio and try and jimmy it past that antenna. There's a lot of very fragile, fine wiring over here. All these little coils are part of the band switching. They're part of the RF tuning and the oscillators and stuff. And there's some rather tiny wires, like right there. And there, that's a pretty small wire. You get hung up in that and don't know it, you know, rip it out, you can cause yourself some serious grief, and it won't be any fun to get that fixed. I've got actually a big stack of these radios, and all that's wrong with them are the tuners are screwed up. It's kind of sad. One of the other things I did to this radio, this is the This is the other antenna, the loop antenna. This is for broadcast only, I believe. One of the other things I did to this radio is the tuning was pretty much froze up on this thing. I took some tuner cleaner and carefully cleaned this capacitor, and especially up front there's some little ball bearings in there. Move that wire, I bet you might be able to see them. Yeah, right there on the edge. Let's see here, how about we move it? Yeah, see it right there? That thing was pretty much a big gooky mess. This radio has an unusual dial string layout. If your dial string is broke, not to be discouraging, but you're going to have a tiny fight. There actually is this dial string, the black one here, and that runs this one, and then this kind of takes off and runs some other dial strings that run the pointer and stuff. It's an annoying little... So theoretically, you can have the tuner work on this radio, but the dial pointer not work. It's kind of laid out with the black string is one loop and this kind of white string is another. Another thing I did was in here there is a little mech that has a tensioner, and it was kind of froze up too. A tiny drop of oil I put in there, and that slowly loosened that up. I might take the face down. There's actually a little C-clip, and take that C-clip off. Another point of interest is this roller. I basically took and carefully shoved it back like that and put a tiny drop of oil. Basically, what I did was I put a little bit of oil in a upside down pop bottle lid, and then used a toothpick to just barely touch it. There's another roller here. I did the same thing too. You just shove it back, and right here is the last roller. So there's kind of a triangle there. Another thing I did was I carefully tried to shine up this rail that the pointer slides on, and I ended up putting a very thin film of oil on there. Yes, I know some of you are screaming bloody murder. Well, you know what? It's my radio. I can do what I damn well please. That helped things quite a bit. Now the thing at least moves. Before it wouldn't move, and it actually was slipping on the bottom tuner knob. I had a tough time getting one of the knobs, the tuning knob, off of this thing. It took a little coaxing. Be careful when you do that. Those knobs are actually pressed on, and they have kind of a spline type mechanism. And they just fit on there, but you can see in here they have a number of little kind of splines, and that one was really on there. When it comes time to put that back on, make sure you rock it back and forth till you feel it kind of click onto the spline and then push it on. I hate to tell you how many old radios I've seen where the knobs have been screwed up or destroyed because somebody just shoved them on there, and they slowly gnaw or what's that word? Waller out. I love that word. They waller out that hole, and then you're really kind of, you're in bad shape. And if you got pieces of paper and stuff stuck in there, be careful. You're on your way to a kind of a knob hill. One of the other things I discovered about this radio that actually was a showstopper for a while after I got it running, it wouldn't, I couldn't get any volume out of it. And one of the old repair tricks is to touch the center lead of the volume control. Be careful when you do this. It potentially may be hot, but if you're careful, it's no big deal. So you do that trick on your own discretion. What that does is it uses you as kind of a signal generator or an antenna to inject 60 cycles into that control. Usually that'll take you right onto a preamp tube, a detector tube, or the audio output tube. You'll probably hear a loud buzz, so don't be shocked when you do this. Another good way to do that is to take a test lead and you can use a test lead, and if I can get it in the camera, how about I zoom out? you can touch it with that, and you just from the kind of capacitance in your hand, you might couple enough to kind of make that buzzing noise. It's a poor man's trick, but it works and it's fast, and it's a tool you have on hand. Well, yeah, literally. Okie dokie. So anyway, I was having a little trouble. That wouldn't work. So what I noticed was this little barrier strip, which is actually just hooked to the speaker ear here. What I did was I looked at this, and this is actually kind of wired into that jack on the front, that headphone jack. I took this lead loose here to check the continuity of the coil in the speaker, just to make sure it was bad. It wasn't bad. I didn't think it was. I checked the continuity on the speaker, but when I checked the continuity of the coil, it appeared to be open. I thought, oh, that's not good. One of the things I noticed was I got to fooling around here, and these contacts were actually cruded up, especially this one. When I took it off, it was really gross under there. I took some really, really super fine sandpaper and carefully rubbed that. I put it on the end of I glued it to the end of a little stick. Actually, it was technically a chopstick. There's one of the great tools of our time. Let's thank the Japanese or the Chinese or whatever Asian country invented the chopstick. Anyway, I kind of cleaned that up. You could use really fine steel wool, maybe not so much. If you do, make sure you blow it out. It's actually, don't use steel wool. You could get into trouble with it. The reason being, those little flakes will fall off, and they could get around in there. So anyway, let's flip her over and see what we can hear this morning. Kind of take it easy on the wiring on these. Sometimes these, this is the battery socket for the big battery pack. It can be cloth, and it won't take too kindly to too much abuse. Yeah, I rolled it around too much and made it angry, probably. There we go.
The Ralston Arena box office or at ralstonarena.com or call 1-800-440-3741.
Cloudy skies once again with a 60% chance of showers and thunder showers after 8 a.m. lasting through the afternoon into the evening. 57 for the afternoon, high to north wind at 5 per hour. Tonight mostly cloudy down to 42 for the low. Decreasing clouds with a high of 58, and Friday mostly cloudy up to 57. From WOWT6, the weather.
More robust.
One of the other things you need to know too is if you're going to work on these radios, like I said, this is the broadcast antenna, and its lead, it needs to get hooked back up. Try and resist the urge to plug and unplug things while these are running. It's kind of a bad practice. And if you get a hold of one of these in good shape, you don't need to make things worse.
An anchor says.
Well, I'll get a ding from YouTube because I played copyrighted music. Kind of get tired of that. It's not like I'm redistributing music.
Is honey.
Couple of work.
leftover pizza. And then another kid got a toothbrush and took the lid off the yogurt. And they took a rubber band and they fashioned a spoon out of this foil.
Tuning's still a little rough on this unit.
Creighton basketball. The Jays are within 1,000 tickets of selling out every home game. 7 of those games are already sold out.
These switches here are kind of the tone control, and they can be a little grumpy sometimes. The tone control on this radio is kind of interesting.
Huskers are 12th, the highest of the four. The father of Illinois quarterback Nathan Shieldhouse has been banned from attending any more Illinois home games this season. Why? He got into a fight during the Michigan State game in the stands and then resisted arrest.
Well, that's all very interesting. Well, I think I'm going to shut you off here and continue tinkering on this. Some other tools that'll help you is a nice little soft paintbrush. You can get a cheap paintbrush at the dollar store or the dollar tool store, or sometimes the home centers have cheap paintbrushes. Since I go to quite a few estate sales and auctions, I kind of have an unending supply of cheap paintbrushes. And I use them to kind of dust around in there real carefully and, you know, chase some dirt. That's a pretty good tool. I'm going to go ahead and work on some of the other band switching on this radio and see if some of the other bands work. This thing is really clean on the bottom. It's really in great shape. Can't think of anything else you need to know right off the bat. Oh, well, I can. One thing that can be a little bit annoying is this electrolytic capacitor. It's really the only electrolytic inside the unit. And I lost the chopstick. Yeah. How convenient. Well, we get the next best thing. Since this radio, the ground kind of floats above the chassis, a good place to hook your lead is this ground right there. And then you can test these other DC voltages. One of the things that might help you is to get a tiny little alligator clip, preferably one with a rubber coating on it, since it's pretty crowded in there, and clamp that on there when you're testing voltages. You don't need to have, you know, both hands tied up doing stuff. Anything you can do to make your life a little easier and a little more careful will promote not damaging things. Well, there you go. There's the upside down Zenith Transoceanic. This is an r600. There are quite a few different Transoceanics. This is probably, I believe, later produced, so it's a newer set. I'm not sure about the date. I'm not a Trans-Oceanic expert. There are plenty of folks that have that field pinned down. So I guess I have interest and expertise in other areas. It's still pretty fun. Word of warning, if you feel like you're getting in over your head, don't be afraid to stop and maybe see if there's a radio club or, you know, something like that in your area. You know, I think you would be better served to seek out some help and information as opposed to butchering a set and then it ending up in a tired looking basket. About, I think it's been over a couple years ago, I went to an estate sale and bought 30, I think there was 33 Trans-Oceanics, all in various states of demolition, basically. And I got to talking to the family members there, and basically this guy was kind of a TV person, but never really mastered radio, which had me scratching my head. Anyway, he really liked working on the Zenith radios, but he wasn't very good at it. Sorry, don't mean to kick your party. And some of these were real basket cases. Some of them actually were in milk crates or baskets. It was kind of sad. But for, I think I paid 30 bucks. I gave him $1 a radio about. Yielded a lot of valuable little parts. Some of those radios were pretty much just garbage. Yielded a lot of valuable tubes, a lot of valuable little goofy, cosmetic doodads, hinges, and handles, and it was definitely worth it. It was just kind of sad to see so many radios in such terrible condition. And one of the family members said, yeah, he never really could ever fix any of those. I think I made about half a dozen decent radios out of all those. And then still had an unending supply of parts. They've since gotten reduced down to kind of just the basic components. Some of them were in such bad shape it wasn't worth salvaging, which is kind of tiring and sad. Oh well. If you have a question or a comment, feel free to leave it. If you'd like to subscribe to my channel, I work on little radios from time to time. They kind of come and go. It depends on what I get a hold of. This one's in such good shape, I think it's a keeper for my personal stash. Unless one of my friends spies it and goes out of their way to try and beat me out of it. Anyway, if I make some progress on the other bands and find some other little goodies to tell you about, I'll be back. Anyway, have a groovy day. Take her easy.